Your key question. When React builds a string, is it talking to the DOM? The answer is no. Building a string happens purely inside JavaScript, V8, no DOM involved yet. So React talks to the V8 before, before it talks to DOM. So React, when compiled, it's already talking to V8. So that's where it builds the string. What actually happens? Const title equals string React semicolon, then next line const title text equals string hello plus title semicolon. This is string creation, happens in V8 and is stored in heap. So remember the heap storing. So before it create like a JavaScript or it transform to a JavaScript that will contact the DOM API, it will build a string first before it creates a heap. So these steps are the missing steps before. Only later, React sends that string to DOM. So later, on that heap that was built from V8, it will only send that if it needed based on React thieving algorithm. So React is basically, you said React just abstract DOM API. Yes, exactly. React is equal abstraction over DOM APIs. Instead of writing document that create element function, append child function, set attribute function, you write input with an ID attribute search, then closing tags. Now let's do the side by side. This is what you ask, like React version, JSX function of empty parameters inside this const title equal React string. So that's a primitive data. Then return div parent container, then h1 hello with string interpolation title, closing h1, then next line input with an ID attribute search, closing, then closing div. Now equivalent DOM API version manual const div equal document that create element div, which is the parent container, then const h1 equal document that create element h1 string, closing, then h1.next content equal parameter string hello React, then const input equal document that create element parameter string, then input.id equal search. So after we create those texts and then the div and the h1, then only after we first create the parent and then the first child element, which is the h1 with its text hello React, and then the second child element, which is an input with its attribute search, and then div.append child with the parameter h1, then div.append child with the parameter input. So we're basically appending this node to the actual node DOM, and then document.body that append child div. So we append this h1 to div, append this input element to the parent container div, and then append that parent container div to the body of the HTML for it to show in the browser. This is the connection. React code is equal description. DOM API code is equal actual execution. Connect the JSX chapter. JSX, we have h1 hello string with an interpolation title, closing h1 tags means it run JS title. Second, build string in memory. Third, put into React element object. So in this h1 kind of like HTML React declaration, first it run the JS title because it is interpolated inside this child element, and then second, build string in memory, and then put into React element object. So we build the we run the JS title first in the V8 and then build string there and then put that in that element object. Then React does h1.text content equal string hello React. Then fifth, connect to React element. From your earlier reading, we have an object with a member type value h1 string, comma, member props with a member object with a member children. So this is a nested objects with a value hello React string. React interprets this as const l equal document that create element parameter string h1 closing then l that text content equal parameter string hello React. Now 6, connect to memory, your earlier confusion. Title is equals to React. Hello React. This is a string. Then React element is so for the heap, the title equals to React is in the heap. So this is the one we declared first before the function, and then the hello React inside the function is a string, and it's in the heap as well. And the React element object, which are the HTML element, are also an object. The stock is the app with an empty parameter runs, and then it builds string, and then it returns object. So the app are the pointer for those string, and then the returns of object. Now important, no DOM interaction happens yet. So no DOM from that stock and a heap because it's currently running in V8 engine. So it converts those to JavaScript first in its and then run into a V8 engine. So before we connect or we contact DOM API, we need to separate the stock and the heap, convert that to a JavaScript object running into a V8 and build the necessary objects, and then after that only we can contact the DOM API. Now DOM interaction only happens here. React finishes building element 3. So after we create those objects, we will now create a tree to see the repeated dependency and repeated object, then calls DOM API. So as we notice, or as we have discussed before, we actually do the DOM tree before we actually contact the DOM API. So this is just some more detailed discussion of that. Now full corrected flow, your version fixed. You wrote a flow earlier, is the corrected version. You write JSX. Second, JSX turn to React.create element function. Then third, it will be JS objects created. So after you write a declaration, it will turn into Reacts that create element, which is essentially a JavaScript, and then that JavaScript in turns will create a stock and a heap. So those so from those stock and heap you will get an object created, so heap and then V8, and you're also gonna carve out some V8 space for it to run, for that heap to run, and then app executes. So this is stock. So as you can see, we started with the heap and then the app, and then the stock executes because now we have the necessary object and the JavaScript or details, data from those code. Now the stock will now execute one by one. Then fifth, React builds element 3, JS only, no DOM yet. So it builds this element 3 just using the JavaScript code or object. Then 6, React calls DOM APIs, create element, set attribute, append child. Then 7, browser creates real DOM nodes. 8, UI appears on screen. 9, user clicks OS to browser. 10, event loop runs, JS handler. So once the UI appear on screen, the user can now click. So when clicking, of course, it's coming from the OS, from your hardware to the OS and then to browser. Then the browser receive, and then event loop will run. So event loop will run since the stock is already there ready. The JS handler will handle those events. So that's why event. That's why it's called event loop, because it's handling outside events such as mouse click. Then JS calls DOM API. So as you can see, the browser um, then now talk to the event loop, uh, and then that event loop will coming from the V8 engine will decide how it will handle based on the stock code of your React. Then the JS calls DOM API. So based on your code running, which is already converted to JS, those JS now will call DOM API, because those are the event that is being handled. Then browser updates UI, then OS. So after the browser updates UI, the browser will contact your OS again, and your OS will now route your keyboard input. So a lot of things that happen simultaneously now, where focus fits in this React side. So we have button with on click equal spread operator, equal object inside this spread operator becomes button that add event listener parameter string click comma handler, then input that focus function. Important, focus function is equal to DOM API, not React. So as you can see, we call the DOM API, the button that event listener, then parameters string click comma handler, and then inside is its DOM API. So it's not really reacting, so it's more of a DOM API, the input that focus. So it's not a React send. Final connection to everything you ask. Curly braces, run JavaScript, it build values in memory. React element, JS object describing UI. React component, function that returns those objects. So as we noticed earlier, the function, the app, has a stack, and at the same time it returns the object for it to be able to execute before the DOM tree and then contact the DOM API. The DOM API is actual system that creates real UI. So the DOM API is the system that allows or that creates the real UI. Just like how with like module system are actually what makes the asynchronous programming works in the backend. So final insight, this is the AHA. React does not build UI directly. It first builds description objects, second then translate them into DOM API calls. One sentence to remember: JSX to objects, to React, to DOM API, to real UI. So the description is really an objects under hood, which is translated to JavaScript, then translate them into DOM API calls. So one sentence to remember: JSX to objects, JSX turn into objects, turn to React, then DOM API, then real UI. So why your confusion is valid, you were mixing string, building, JS or V8, then DOM creation browser, then React abstraction middle layer. Now separated, JS builds data, React interprets it, browser renders it. So the JS builds the object and then subsequently interpreted by React, whether it's diffing algorithm, whether it's something else, etc. Now the JS builds the data, React interprets, and then the browser renders it. JSX to V8 memory, to React elements, to DOM, to event loop, to OS. So we'll tie it directly to the JSX chapter: React element versus component, focus behavior. The example, simple but simple but complete. So function app, empty parameter with initial declaration of const title equal to react string semicolon, then return div parent container with an h1 label input and button children element. So for h1 we have hello string interpolation title. For layer label we have html4 attribute equals to search string, then inside the search, and then input with an id attribute equals to search string, then button on click, then button with an on-click function document that get element by id parameter string that focus with and then inside this focus input. So inside of this element is a focus input, so it's just a focus directly focus input, no like quotation, and then closing button, then closing div. Now step 1, JSX to JavaScript, what chapter explains. JSX is transformed into function app, empty parameter, then inside this const title equals empty string react semicolon, then this HTML inside will be changed to create element. So return react.create element with the parameter div comma null comma. So these are the three parameters we have in create element. So in the third argument we have react.create element h1 comma null comma hello string plus title. The next time react.create element argument label string comma with an object html4 with the value search comma parameter comma search string, then closing. Then next time react.create element argument string comma object with the member id with the value string closing. Then react.create element then inside is string button comma closing, then on click arrow function, then inside this document that get element by id parameter search that focus closing, and then comma focus input. Now key inside JSX chapter, JSX hides creates element functions. You are writing h1 element with the string hello with title string interpolation h1, but React actually sees member type with the string h1 comma props colon or props member with the value of an object, and this object has a member children with the value string hello react. Then step 2, v8 memory heap versus stock. Heap object stored, so app function title equal react string, the react elements which is the objects, and then event handler function. Example object member type with a value input string comma member props with a value object, and inside of this object with a member id with a value search. Now stock execution, this is the call stock. First we have app function, then react.create element function, then return objects. So those are the call stock that we need to follow, or the stock needs to follow. Step 3, react element versus component versus instance. Component definition, function app empty parameter with an object, just a function in heap. Element result of JSX like this, app closing tag, closing HTML tags becomes object of value of a member type with a value app comma, and then member props with the value empty object. Now instance, so if you have this like app without anything, the props will be an empty object and the type will be app. Instance real thing creates React creates when React runs, executes app function, then builds tree of elements, create internal fiber nodes. That's where it actually changes the UI. So that's kind of like the commit phase, because that's where it will talk now to the DOM API. Oh my god. Snap 4. React builds the DOM. Now React takes with the member type value input string comma member props with the value object, and this object it has a member ID with the value search string and then closing, and that creates HTML input with an ID or attribute ID equals to search string. Key insight: React elements is not equal to nodes. Thing React element lives where JS heap. Thing DOM node lives where browser engine. Step 5 event system click button. User clicks button. OS level mouse click detected. Browser creates a click event. Event loop, event queue. So this is related to the call stack. So the app create React element and then returns object is related to this event loop, and that is related to node.js, which we will discuss in the future videos. So event queue to call stack. Now stack executes on click function, then document that get element by ID function, then focus function. Step 6, what focus really does, JavaScript side, document that get element by ID with a parameter or argument search string, returns a reference. Important, this is not the DOM itself, it's a pointer to it. Then input that focus. So as you can see, we created a JavaScript side first that returns a reference, which is not the DOM, which is just a pointer to the actual DOM API. That has DOM.api. Oh my god, what the hell? Now then input focus, then browser engine takes over. It sets active element. Second, updates UI. Then third, shows cursor. OS keyword input goes to that input. Full trace end to end. This is the complete pipeline. First, you write JSX. Second, JSX turn it to React.create element function, which is just a JavaScript. So think about this like a stack, creating a stack at the same time, subsequently returning objects. Though that returns an JS objects, which is heap, that is now pointing to the V8. So it's now actually running. So it will actually turn that to an actual running thing in the V8. So these are just in the V8 when compiled. So when it is interpreted, it will just be in the V8, not yet contacting DOM API. Now fourth, React executes components, which is the stack. So the components, you can also, another way of think about this is it is also a stack where it execute it step by step. Fifth, it builds element tree. 6, it creates real DOM nodes. So it builds now the element tree. So think about this with how the ES modules or JavaScript like build the tree of the modules of the modern JavaScript. It builds the dependencies, etc. So this is like what React optimizes for. It builds that element tree and then only change what actually changed. 6, create real DOM nodes. 7. Browser renders UI. 8. User clicks button OS. Then 9. Event loop runs handler. 10. JS calls focus function. 11. Browser updates active element. 12. OS routes keyboard. How this connects to the JSX chapter? The chapter is teaching you these hidden truths. JSX is not HTML. JSX is JavaScript objects. So it is just using those HTML, kind of like an HTML declarative thing, or it's still using all the HTML thing, but it's just a representation, kind of like declarative programming of HTML. So that's all of the HTML are there, not just the it's just like some attributes are not included. So it's still a JavaScript objects, it allows you just to have a declarative programming using HTML and JavaScript instead of being restricted by script tags. Curly braces run JS during render. It accesses heap data. Attributes HTML4 class name. JS friendly names converted to real DOM attributes. So this HTML4 is really just an JavaScript objects. Now React hides complexity. Instead of document that create element function, appends the child function, add event listener function. This is bad. We have input HTML tag and then button on click equal spread operator closing. So you might think it's hard to understand this. Think about how hard it would be if we would calling the actual DOM API using this HTML thing. So final mental model. Another thing about this is that React allows you to write concise thing at one file that would have been multiple files in HTML and JavaScript. So it's harder actually. Final mental model, this is the one. JSX equal description, React is equal translator, V8 is equal memory manager, browser equal renderer, OS equal hardware interface. Why this is the real basics? What you listed before, stack versus heap, execution flow, functions and closures, event loop, DOM behavior. This is example includes all of them together. JSX enabled developers to express what should be rendered by mixing up HTML with JavaScript, whereas the previous way of thinking was to decouple markup, read HTML from logic, JavaScript. React puts all of it together as one unit in a React component. So that's a good sentence to describe what we just did. Now without extra templating syntax except for the curly braces, we were able to use JavaScript in HTML. So without extra like templating syntax or any additional syntax, we were able to use or incorporate JavaScript within HTML. Every JavaScript data structure from primitive to complex data type now can be used inside HTML. So that's where the primitive, the string, the function, the object, the array can now be used within HTML with the help of JSX using just a curly brackets. Now interview questions. What is JSX in React? Answer: JSX is a syntax extension for JavaScript recommended by React for describing what the UI should look like. Question: can JSX be directly rendered by browsers? No, browsers can't understand JSX. It needs to be transpiled to regular JavaScript using tools like Babel. Question: is JSX mandatory in React? Answer: no, JSX is not mandatory. It's a widely used and convenient way to write React components. Question: so again, JSX are used to write a React functional components. Again, this is how we build pages in React. We're really building components. So these are just the way for us to write that. So before we use JavaScript, HTML, and CSS, now and then we use a complex thing or global scripts. Now we are also able to use the class or the modern JavaScript class and composition over inheritance provided by the JSX or React. Question: how do you render a variable in JSX? Answer: use curly braces to embed variables in JSX like my variable. So again, since variable is everything that we need in a programming language for us to be able to render, now we were able to use this curly braces, which is allow us to embed a variable with HTML to manipulate the DOM of the browser. That's why React are especially used in the web application, which is usually rendered in browser.